My sister barged in and basically announced, "I lost my job, so you're covering my car payment now." I told her flat out no and signed the paperwork for a promotion that would move me to another country. About an hour later, my dad texted saying I was erased from the inheritance if I didn't step in and save her. By sunrise, it wasn't the flood of calls that scared them, it was what they finally realized I'd already done behind their backs. Full story, #Reddit, #Reddit stories, #Storytime, #Redditreadings, #Ida, #AdaReddit. I never thought the day would come when my own family would try to blackmail me, threatening to cut me out of the will if I didn't bail out my sister. But that day arrived, and what happened next? Well, they had no idea I was already one step ahead, setting a trap they walked right into. Okay, so let me set the scene. I was 29 when this whole mess exploded, and honestly, for most of my life, I genuinely thought I had a pretty normal, solid family. My name's Ethan. I've always been the quiet, head down, work hard kind of guy. First in my family to graduate college, homeowner before 30, good job I actually loved. My younger sister, Brenda, though, she was a force of nature, but not in a good way. Every single one of her life crises, they became full-blown family emergencies. Lost a job? We all had to chip in. Credit card debt? Mom and Dad, Diane and Robert, would bail her out. Couldn't afford a vacation? She'd just dip into our family emergency fund, yeah, the one we all contributed to, and never, ever pay it back. She even had this super expensive sports car, bought on a whim, that was a constant financial black hole. And I just tolerated it. I really did. Because it kept the peace. That was my unspoken job in the family, the calm one, the fixer, the guy who smoothed things over when Brenda and my parents inevitably crashed and burned. But man, it always left this bitter, acidic taste in my mouth. It felt like my hard-earned stability was just being treated like a personal ATM, a backup plan for everyone else's chaotic choices. The real tipping point, though, that ignited this whole dumpster fire? It started earlier this year when I landed a massive promotion. I'm talking huge. Better pay, way more responsibility, and this incredible chance to relocate to another country. I was ecstatic, honestly. So proud. I'd grinded for years, late nights, skipped vacations, and it finally felt like it was all paying off. When I told my parents, they offered congratulations, but it felt distracted. Like they weren't truly listening. Then, about a week later, the call came. From Brenda. She didn't even say hello. Just launched right into it, breathless. "I lost my job, and you're going to have to help with my car payments until I get back on my feet." I honestly thought she was joking. I actually laughed. Big mistake. She went absolutely ballistic. "This isn't funny, Ethan. I'm serious. You make way more than me, and I'm not losing my car because you're too selfish to help." My blood pressure started to climb. I just went quiet for a moment. I asked her what happened to her savings. She snapped that she didn't have any. When I pushed back, asking why I should be responsible, she hit me with the classic, "Because you're family. That's what family does." I told her flat out, "No. I'm not paying your car payments." I just couldn't even fathom it. This wasn't some small loan for groceries or a flat tire. This was hundreds of dollars a month, every single month, for a car she didn't need and clearly couldn't afford. She expected me to take on her entire financial burden, indefinitely. She hung up on me. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from my dad, Robert. And it read, "If you don't step up for your sister, you're out of the will." I just stared at that text. For a long, long time. I didn't even know what to say. I hadn't asked them for a single thing since I turned 18. I paid for my own college, bought my own house, built my own career. And now? Now I was being threatened with being cut out of the family, just because I refused to bankroll Brenda's latest disaster. That night, something shifted inside me. I sat down at my computer. Quietly. Methodically. I removed my name from every single joint account I had with my parents. The family emergency fund. The old savings account we'd all chipped into after Nana Clara passed. Even the shared vacation cabin account that was supposed to be for future family getaways. If they were going to treat me like the villain, fine. But I wasn't going to leave my money sitting there for them to drain. By sunrise, I had 37 missed calls. 37. And a string of angry, vicious texts from every direction imaginable. Mom, Diane. Dad, Robert. Brenda. Even Aunt Susan chimed in. Some were classic guilt trips, family sticks together, Ethan. Some were outright threats, you're going to regret this. A few were just pure insults. I didn't respond to a single one. That was the first time I truly allowed myself to feel angry. Not just annoyed or frustrated, but genuinely, shaking mad angry. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the sheer entitlement. The assumption that I existed solely to solve Brenda's problems. The way my parents acted like I somehow owed her my success. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder, what would happen if I just stopped playing my role as the peacemaker? What if I stopped smoothing things over? Stopped being the one to give in? Stopped being the one who understood? The next family dinner was only a few days away. And I knew I was going to show up. But this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. And that, my friends, is where things really started to get interesting. That first family dinner was at my parents' house, like every Sunday. Usually, I'd look forward to it. Dad, Robert, makes a mean roast. But this time, the mere thought of sitting across from Brenda after her demands made my stomach clench. I spent the whole drive rehearsing what I'd say if she even dared to bring up her car payments again. But when I walked in, it wasn't just dinner. It was an ambush. I immediately felt this weird shift in the air. Everyone was already seated, which was bizarre. Usually it was a casual, help-yourself affair. This time, it felt like they were waiting. For me. Brenda was next to Mom, Diane, arms crossed, that smug look on her face she gets when she thinks she's about to win. Dad cleared his throat the moment I stepped in, like I was late for some critical board meeting. Ethan, he said, gesturing to the empty chair. Sit down. We need to talk. As a family. I sat, but my guard was up. Way up. Mom wasted no time. Brenda's been under a lot of stress. And you laughing at her when she called you for help was completely inappropriate. I kept my voice calm, steady. I didn't laugh at her losing her job. I laughed because she called and told me I was going to pay her car payments, like it was an order. Brenda jumped in, her voice sharp. Because you should. You're the only one in this family who can afford it. That was it. Right there. Something inside me just snapped. No, Brenda. I can afford it because I work for it. And I am not responsible for your car payments. Dad leaned forward. Hands clasped, trying to play the mediator. Ethan, you have to understand. She's in a tough spot. Her car is all she has. If she loses it, she'll be stranded. I almost laughed again. Not because it was funny, but because the irony was suffocating. She has somewhere to go. She has this house, Dad, you've let her move back in before. And it's a car. But that's not really what this is about, is it? This is about the fact that, for once, I'm not swooping in to clean up her mess. And nobody here likes that. Brenda's face turned scarlet. You think you're better than me because you have some fancy job now? Because you bought a house and drive a nice car? You think that makes you special? That stung. Not because it was true, but because I could hear the bitter jealousy dripping from her every single word. I took a slow, deliberate breath. No, Brenda, I don't think I'm better. I just think I'm tired of being treated like my hard work is some kind of community piggy bank. Mom sighed dramatically. Ethan, we've always helped each other in this family. When you were in school and needed help with rent. I cut her off. Hard. I never asked you for money. I worked 2 jobs. I slept in my car for a week one semester because I couldn't make rent, and I didn't ask you for a dime. That shut them up for a moment. But only for a moment. Brenda sniffled, ramping up the wounded little sister act. I just don't know why you hate me so much that you'd watch me lose my car. And that was it. That was the moment the entire script completely flipped for me. It wasn't that she was asking for help. It was that she was framing my refusal as some act of pure cruelty. Like I was choosing to destroy her life. My jaw clenched. You know what I think? My voice was low, dangerously calm. I think you've gotten so used to everyone bending over backward for you that the second someone says no, you act like it's a personal attack. Dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. That's enough, Ethan. But I wasn't done. No, it's not enough. You all told me I was out of the will if I didn't bail her out. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, then I don't want anything from you anyway. Keep your will. Keep everything. But don't you dare call me selfish for refusing to go broke over someone else's choices. The room went dead silent. Mom looked like I'd slapped her. Brenda's eyes were wide, but there was this faint, sickening flicker of triumph there, like she'd finally exposed me as the bad guy. Dinner was unbelievably awkward after that. Nobody said much, and I barely touched my food. I could feel all their eyes on me, like they were waiting for me to crack and apologize. But I didn't. When I left, Mom hugged me stiffly, murmuring, "You'll understand someday." I got in my car and just sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Brenda still had that look, the one she gets when she doesn't get her way but is already scheming about how to make sure she will. Sure enough, the very next week, my phone started blowing up with calls from extended family. My Aunt Susan called, teary-eyed, telling me Brenda had been crying to her, saying she didn't know how she was going to survive because I'd abandoned her. My cousin Mark texted, saying he heard I was refusing to help and it was pretty cold. The narrative was spreading like wildfire, and I was quickly becoming the villain of the family story. I tried to ignore it, at first. But every time my phone buzzed with another judgmental message, I felt this slow, angry burn in my chest. Then came the kicker. Brenda posted on Facebook. Oh, you know the type, vague booking about how some people would rather watch family lose everything than lend a helping hand, and how she was praying for strength during this difficult time. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. Half the comments were from relatives and family friends, piling on. Calling me selfish. Saying, money changes people. And one even suggested I must have forgotten where I came from. That one? That hurt the most. Because I hadn't forgotten. If anything, I remembered too well. I remembered every single time I'd been told to be the bigger person when Brenda took my things without asking. I remembered when I had to skip a school trip because my parents used the savings account I'd been putting my summer job money into to bail her out of some mess. I remembered being told, over and over, that I was the responsible one, like it was some badge of honor. When really, it was just code for the one we can rely on to sacrifice. I realized then that this wasn't just about Brenda's car payments. This was about years of being expected to give more, do more, be more, and never complain. The next family dinner was coming up. And I already knew what was waiting for me, the guilt trip, the confrontation, the attempts to make me cave. But this time, I wasn't just going to sit there and take it. And I had no idea that the confrontation I was about to walk into would push things past a point we could ever come back from. I showed up to that next family dinner with a knot the size of a golf ball in my stomach. The last dinner had been tense, sure, but this time? I could tell something was profoundly different even before I walked in. Too many cars outside my parents' house. Aunt Susan's SUV, my uncle's truck, even Nana Clara's old sedan. This wasn't just Sunday dinner. This was a summit meeting. When I stepped inside, I could hear voices from the dining room. Low, heated. My name was said more than once. I froze in the hallway, just listening. He's being ridiculous, Brenda was saying. He could pay off the car tomorrow and still have money left over. He just doesn't want to help. My dad, Robert's voice came next, stern, authoritative. He's always been stubborn. We just have to make him see reason. Mom, Diane, added softly, we can't let Brenda lose her car. It would be humiliating. Humiliating. Not tragic. Not devastating. Humiliating. Like this was about their pride more than Brenda's ability to, I don't know, get to a job interview. I stepped into the room, and the conversation stopped dead. Nana Clara was there too, sitting at the end of the table like a silent judge. She looked tired, disappointed. My heart sank. Dad gestured to the chair again. Sit down, Ethan. We need to settle this. Once and for all. I sat, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Brenda leaned forward, theatrical and pitiful all at once. I've tried everything, she said, like she was giving testimony in court. I sold my jewelry. I canceled my gym membership. I even stopped ordering takeout. I'm doing my part, but if I don't make this month's payment, they're going to repossess my car. She looked directly at me. Do you really want that on your conscience? I stared at her. For a long time. Brenda, you've had months to get ahead of this. Why didn't you look for a cheaper car? Why didn't you try to sell it? Why is your first and only solution to call me and tell me it's my responsibility? Her lip curled. Because your family, Ethan. You've always been the one with the good job, the nice things, the safety net. You're just going to sit there and let me lose everything while you go live your perfect little life in another country? I could feel the entire table turning against me. Every single pair of eyes focused squarely on my face, waiting for me to say the magic words, to just fix it all. And then Dad dropped the bomb. We've made a decision, he said, his voice clipped. Your mother and I went to the bank this week. We took out a line of credit against the cabin property. My stomach dropped. You what? To help Brenda, he said, matter-of-factly. To keep her from losing her car. It was the right thing to do. I gripped the edge of the table. The cabin property. That wasn't just theirs. It was supposed to be ours. Mine, Brenda's, cousin Mark's. When they passed, it was the one piece of family legacy that hadn't been touched. The one thing we were all told we'd inherit equally someday. You didn't even tell me, I said, my voice flat, barely a whisper. Mom bristled. We didn't need your permission. You've made it clear you don't care about this family's problems, so we did what we had to do. I laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. So, let me get this straight. You told me I was out of the will if I didn't bail her out. I said, fine. And your solution was to mortgage part of my inheritance anyway, so she could keep a car she can't afford? Brenda crossed her arms, a sickeningly smug look spreading across her face. It's not your inheritance yet. And when I get back on my feet, I'll pay it back. I shot back, the words burning. Like you paid back the emergency fund? Like you paid back the car money from 2 years ago? Or the vacation account? Her face went crimson. Dad's jaw tightened. That's enough, he barked. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. You went behind my back, I said slowly, looking at each of them. You used something that was supposed to belong to all of us to clean up her mess. And you didn't even bother to ask. You didn't even bother to tell me until it was already done. Nana Clara cleared her throat. Her voice, frail, was surprisingly firm. He's right, she said quietly. You should have asked him. That caused a ripple at the table, but Dad brushed it off. We did what was necessary. If Ethan doesn't want to contribute, then we'll move forward without him. Something inside me broke then. The last thread holding me to the idea that we were all on the same team. I looked at my sister, who had the audacity to look triumphant, like she had won something. I stood up slowly. You know what? I said, my voice steady, clear. You've made your choice. You've made it clear where I stand in this family. And I hear you. Loud and clear. Mom's eyes narrowed. Don't be dramatic, Ethan. I turned to her, my hands shaking. Not from fear, but from how much I wanted to say everything I'd kept bottled up for years. Dramatic? You mortgaged part of the only thing that ever truly tied me to this family. And you didn't even hesitate. You've always bent over backward to make sure Brenda never feels the consequences of her actions. And you've always expected me to pick up the slack. Well, congratulations. You don't have to worry about that anymore. I walked out before they could even respond. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive straight home, and never talk to any of them again. Another part of me, the part that had been stepped on, dismissed, and taken advantage of for years, was already thinking of ways to make sure they never did this to me again. By the time I finally drove away, my mind was racing. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done. Done being the good son. Done being the family's backup plan. Done staying quiet while Brenda got away with everything. And as I stared out at the empty highway, I realized something that made my pulse steady. I had more power than they thought. So much more. I had access to accounts, to documents, even contacts that Brenda and my parents didn't. I knew things about the cabin property, about our family finances, things they'd probably forgotten I even knew. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just thinking about defending myself. I was thinking about fighting back. And that thought, that tiny, sharp, electric thought, was the beginning of something much bigger. Because if they were going to treat me like the enemy, maybe it was time I stopped playing nice. Driving home that night, I felt this crushing weight on my chest. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief. Pure grief. For the family I thought I had. For the idea that somewhere deep down, we all truly had each other's backs. I realized that was just a story I'd been telling myself to make it easier to swallow all the small betrayals over the years. This wasn't just about money, or Brenda's car. This was about trust. And that trust had just been broken in a way that couldn't be fixed with a phone call or a half-hearted apology. When I walked into my house, everything felt too quiet. My living room, usually a sanctuary, now felt sterile, like a waiting room. I just sat on the couch, staring at nothing. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel it all, the raw anger, the profound sadness, the utter exhaustion. I must have sat there for hours, because at some point, my phone buzzed again. It was a group message from my parents. A long wall of texts about how they hoped I'd cool off and come to my senses before I did something I'd regret. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, Brenda sent a separate text, with a crying emoji, "You really hurt me tonight." I don't know how you can live with yourself. I just tossed my phone across the couch. I didn't trust myself to respond. That whole week, I kept my head down at work, but I wasn't really present. My coworkers probably thought I was just stressed about the promotion and my upcoming relocation to another country. But the truth? I was replaying that dinner over and over. The looks on their faces. The smugness in Brenda's eyes. The way Dad, Robert, had said, "We did what was necessary," like that was the end of the discussion. One night, I went for a long walk around the neighborhood, just to clear my head. The air was cool, quiet. I thought about how much of my life had been wrapped up in my family. Not just holidays and birthdays, but even my core decisions. How many times had I chosen to stay close, because I didn't want to abandon them? How many times had I agreed to things I didn't want to do, just to keep the peace? It hit me then. I wasn't just mad at them. I was mad at myself. Mad for being the dependable one for so long. For thinking that if I was just good enough, responsible enough, reliable enough, they'd treat me as an equal instead of a resource. I went home and dug out an old box from the closet. Paperwork I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were copies of the family trust documents, tax forms, even some of the old cabin property paperwork. I'd kept them when I helped my parents organize their estate planning a few years back. I sat there on the floor, flipping through page after page, remembering how I'd been the one to do most of the work then. Calling the lawyer. Setting up meetings. Filing everything properly. And then I noticed something. Something I'd completely forgotten about. My name was listed as co-trustee, in case something happened to my parents. That meant I had certain rights. Access to information. The ability to request records. The realization was like a spark in the dark. I wasn't ready to act on it yet, though. First, I had to sit with what had happened. I had to face the fact that I couldn't go back to how things were. The next Sunday, I skipped family dinner. Mom called, left a voicemail saying she hoped I was done sulking. Dad sent a curt text, "We're disappointed in you." Brenda went even further. She posted another Facebook update about toxic relatives and fake family. Mutual friends started messaging me, asking if everything was okay. It was humiliating. I stopped checking social media entirely. I muted the family group chat. And then, I threw myself into work. If I was going to walk away from my family's expectations, I needed to fully commit to my own life. That meant preparing for the promotion and my relocation to another country like nothing else mattered. It was strangely freeing, at first. I started working out again, something I hadn't done consistently in years. I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made plans with friends I hadn't seen in months. Slowly, the heaviness started to lift. But then, I got a letter in the mail from the bank. Addressed to me, because my name was still listed on one of the family accounts. It was a notice about the line of credit my parents had taken out against the cabin. I don't know what it was about holding that piece of paper in my hands, but something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about Brenda's car payments anymore. This was about them putting our family's future on the line. My future. Without even thinking twice. That night, I stayed up late, combing through the paperwork I'd pulled out earlier. I read every clause, every footnote. I started taking notes. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about taking back some control. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Outwardly, I played it cool. When Mom called the next week, I answered politely. Said work was busy. I didn't argue when she said Brenda was working so hard to get another job. I even agreed to stop by for dinner the following Sunday, just to smooth things over. But inside, I was already planning. I knew I couldn't undo what they had done. But I could make sure that from now on, they'd think twice before assuming they could use my name, my resources, or my future as a bargaining chip. And if I played this right, I could do it without ever raising my voice again. That was the strangest part of all. Realizing that I didn't need to fight them head-on. I could simply step back, let them feel the absence of everything I used to do for them, and let them deal with the fallout themselves. The night before that next dinner, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt calm. Calm, and a little dangerous. Because I knew that tomorrow, I wasn't just going back to sit at their table. I was going back to watch. To listen. To see just how far they were willing to push. And if they crossed the line again? Well, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. By the time that next Sunday rolled around, something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I wasn't just bracing myself for another round of accusations. I was oddly curious. What would they try this time? Instead of dreading dinner, I treated it like a game. A test. What could they possibly say that would hurt me more than what they'd already done? When I walked into my parents' house, the air was different. No dramatic silence, no glaring spotlight waiting for me. Everyone was talking in low tones, and Brenda was actually scrolling on her phone like nothing was wrong. Maybe they thought the last dinner had taught me a lesson. Maybe they thought I'd come crawling back, ready to make amends. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I smiled politely, sat down. And when Mom, Diane, asked how work was going, I didn't downplay it. I told them all about the big project I'd just wrapped up, how my boss had praised me in front of the whole department, and how my relocation to another country had officially been finalized. Brenda looked up from her phone, eyebrows raised. So, you're really moving out of the country? Yep, I said casually, spearing a piece of roast. End of next month. They're covering everything. International movers, temporary housing, even a car stipend in the new country. I said it lightly, but I watched her face carefully. There it was. That little twitch of her mouth. The one she gets when someone else has good news she can't compete with. Dad, Robert, cleared his throat. That's good, son. But don't forget you're still listed on some of these accounts and documents. We'll need to go over those before you leave. I just smiled. Oh, I already took care of that. Pulled my name from everything weeks ago. The table went absolutely quiet. Brenda's fork clattered against her plate. You what? I shrugged like it was nothing. Didn't seem fair to have my name tied up in things I don't have a say in. Figured it was simpler this way. Mom pursed her lips, but she didn't argue. I think she realized there wasn't much she could say without starting another full-blown fight in front of Nana Clara, who was silently sipping her tea like a queen presiding over court. That was the first night I left feeling genuinely good. Not just relieved, but satisfied. For once, I hadn't been dragged into defending myself. I'd simply stated a fact and let them sit with it. Over the next few weeks, my life started to take on this strange, exhilarating momentum. Work was thriving. My boss pulled me aside one morning and said he wanted me to lead an important presentation for a senior client. It was the kind of opportunity that could open even bigger doors for me down the line. I threw myself into preparation. Late nights at the office weren't draining anymore. They felt purposeful. I wasn't just working to stay afloat or to keep the peace at home. I was working for me. I also started getting my financial house in order. I met with a financial advisor, something I'd been putting off for years. And together, we went through every account, every asset. By the time we were done, everything was clean, organized, and most importantly, completely separate from my family's reach. There was something so empowering about that process. Every form I signed, every account I moved, felt like cutting one more string that had been tying me down. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with friends. One Friday night, a buddy from college invited me to a small get-together. I almost said no. My old habit was to keep my weekends clear, just in case my family needed me. But then I caught myself. There was no just in case anymore. I went. And it was one of the best nights I'd had in years. We laughed until midnight, reminisced about stupid things we'd done in school. By the end of the night, I realized how much I'd missed feeling like I belonged somewhere without any strings attached. Meanwhile, Brenda's situation seemed to be getting worse. I wasn't asking questions, but word had a way of getting back to me through other relatives. She hadn't found a new job yet, and apparently, she'd missed another car payment. I should have felt bad. A few months earlier, I probably would have. But now, instead of guilt, all I felt was this cold, steady clarity. This was exactly why I'd pulled away. One night, I got an email from the lawyer who'd helped my parents set up the trust years ago. He wanted to schedule a meeting to review the status of the cabin property. Routine stuff, he said. But since I was still listed as a backup trustee, he needed my signature on a few documents before I moved. That meeting changed everything. Sitting in his office, I learned just how much leverage I still had. Because my parents had mortgaged the property after naming me co-trustee, they technically had to disclose every transaction to me for record keeping. That meant I had full visibility into what they'd done, the amounts, the terms, even the repayment schedule. I left the office with copies of everything, my mind buzzing. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. But it was about information. I suddenly understood just how deep they'd gone into debt to save Brenda's car. And I knew that if things kept going the way they were going to have to make some very hard choices soon. Back at work, my presentation went off without a hitch. The client loved it, and my boss took me out to lunch the next day to thank me personally. I see big things for you in the next couple of years, he said. Keep doing what you're doing. I smiled all the way back to my desk. That night, I opened a bottle of wine by myself and sat on the back porch, looking up at the stars. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because my family approved, not because I'd earned their praise, but because I'd chosen it for myself. I was building something that was mine, and mine alone. And quietly, in the back of my mind, I started to wonder what it would look like when they finally realized they couldn't control me anymore. Would they get angry? Would they beg? Would they try to manipulate me one last time? Whatever it was, I knew I'd be ready. Because now, I wasn't just surviving the storm. I was learning how to use it. The meeting with the lawyer had been a quiet turning point, but I didn't fully realize how much until I got home and spread all the paperwork across my kitchen table. I went through every single page slowly, highlighting, making notes in the margins, cross-referencing dates and amounts with the copies of the old trust documents I still had. By the end of that night, I knew exactly how much debt my parents had taken on to save Brenda's car. And it wasn't a small number. They'd borrowed more than the remaining value of the cabin property. If they defaulted, the bank could technically force a sale of the cabin. That meant the one piece of our family's legacy that was supposed to be shared equally. It could be gone entirely. First, I felt sick. Then, slowly, something else started to build inside me. Calm determination. This wasn't just about Brenda anymore. This was about the fact that they'd gambled with something that didn't just belong to them. And now, for the first time, I had all the information they'd probably assumed I didn't. I spent the next few weeks laying groundwork. Quietly. Carefully. The first thing I did was schedule another meeting with the lawyer. This time, just the two of us. I asked him to walk me through exactly what my rights were as co-trustee, and what my options were if I wanted to protect my share of the cabin's value. He was surprised at how thorough I wanted to be, but he explained everything. I could request a full accounting of the debt. I could insist on regular updates about payments. And, if necessary, I could petition the court to protect my interest if I believed mismanagement was happening. That last part stuck with me. Mismanagement. I didn't say anything to my family yet. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners. Kept smiling politely when Mom, Diane, made little comments about how nice it must be to have money. Kept nodding when Brenda gave dramatic updates about how hard it was to find a job in this economy. But privately, I was building a picture. I talked to the bank, under the pretense of needing information for estate planning, and confirmed the repayment schedule. They were already behind. If they missed one more payment, they'd be in default. Then, almost by accident, I discovered something else. A coworker of mine mentioned offhand that a branch of the company I worked for was opening an office not far from where my parents lived. Not just an office, a major branch. One that was going to be hiring aggressively for administrative, marketing, and support roles. I did some digging. Within a week, I had an email from HR confirming that job postings would go live soon. Good paying roles. The kind of jobs that Brenda could absolutely apply for, if she wanted to make her car payments. I bookmarked the postings and printed them out. Not to hand to her. Not yet. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the best revenge wouldn't be some dramatic confrontation. It wouldn't be yelling or ultimatums. It would be quiet. It would be letting them walk themselves into a corner. Letting them feel the pressure build until they were the ones who came to me. And when they did, I wouldn't be empty-handed. I started putting aside even more money. Funneling part of every paycheck into a separate account. Not for Brenda. Not for them. But for me. For whatever came next. One evening, I got a call from Nana Clara. She didn't mention Brenda or the debt. At first, she just asked how I was doing, how work was going, how the move to another country was coming along. Then, she got quiet and said, "You know, Ethan, I think you were right to stand your ground. Your parents love you, but they've let things get out of hand with your sister." It caught me off guard. She'd been so silent during all those dinners, I assumed she agreed with them. "I just hate seeing the family torn apart like this," she went on. "But you can't be the only one carrying the weight forever. I hope they realize that soon." That phone call lit a spark in me. If Nana Clara, the one person they all listened to, was quietly on my side, then maybe I wasn't as isolated as they wanted me to feel. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing cracks in their united front. Mom seemed more stressed at dinner, less quick to defend Brenda. Dad, Robert, was quieter than usual, distracted. Brenda, meanwhile, was still posting cryptic updates online about fake family, but even some of her own friends were starting to comment with not-so-subtle hints, like, "Have you considered getting a roommate?" Or, "There are plenty of jobs out there if you really look." I didn't say a word, but I did make one more move. I emailed the lawyer again and asked him to draft a formal request for a full financial accounting of the trust. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening. Just an official document requiring my parents to provide proof of every transaction related to the cabin property loan. When I got the email back with a copy of the request, I sat back in my chair and stared at it for a long time. This was it. The first domino. Because I knew the second they opened that letter, they'd realize I wasn't just this stubborn son anymore. I was watching. And I wasn't going to let them gamble with my future again. The night before I sent the request, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and thought about how far things had come. A few months ago, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who always smoothed things over. Now, I wasn't smoothing anything over. I was setting the table. And I had a feeling the next family dinner was going to be one for the history books. When I finally mailed that formal request for a full financial accounting of the trust, I expected at least a day or two of silence before the fallout began. I was wrong. Less than 24 hours later, my dad, Robert, called. His voice was tight. Controlled. The voice he used when he was trying desperately not to yell. "Ethan," he said, "no hello, no preamble. What is this letter we just got from the lawyer?" "It's a request for the trust's financial records," I said evenly. "Pretty standard. I'm co-trustee, so I have a right to see them." "You're making this into a legal matter," he snapped. "We're family." "I know we are," I said, my voice calm. "And I'm not contesting anything. I just want to know exactly what was done with the property we all have a stake in." There was silence on the other end. I could almost picture him grinding his teeth. "You didn't have to go through a lawyer," he finally said. "Yes," I said softly. "I did." I could hear his breath catch just a little. And that was the moment I realized he understood. I wasn't bluffing. The next Sunday, I showed up to dinner dressed in a crisp button-down, clean-shaven, calm as ever. I didn't storm in. I didn't start with accusations. I greeted everyone politely, even Brenda, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon when she saw me. Dinner was tense. Dad didn't say much. Mom, Diane, kept giving me these worried glances. And Brenda kept tapping her nails on the table like a drumbeat of pure irritation. Finally, halfway through the meal, Dad spoke. "We got your request. The paperwork's being prepared." I nodded. "Good." Brenda rolled her eyes. "This is so over the top, Ethan. You're acting like we stole from you or something." I set my fork down. "You used a family asset without consulting everyone who had a stake in it. That's not theft, but it is mismanagement." Mom flinched at the word. Dad's jaw tightened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not here to fight," I continued. "I'm here to make sure that from now on, there's transparency. Every dollar that goes in or out related to the cabin is going to be documented and shared. If payments are late, I'll know. If the bank threatens repossession, I'll know. And if I think things are heading in the wrong direction, I'll take steps to protect my share. Legally." Brenda scoffed. "You drag your own parents to court?" I looked her dead in the eye. "If it meant protecting the one thing Nana Clara wanted us to have?" "Yes." Her mouth snapped shut. There was a long silence. Finally, Nana Clara spoke up, her voice soft but steady. "He's right. It was wrong not to tell him. This isn't just about you, Brenda." That felt like the first real win in months. I let the silence stretch a little longer before I leaned back and smiled like we were just having a pleasant conversation. "Oh, and I brought something for you, Brenda." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously as I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed job postings from my company's new local branch. I slid them across the table to her. "They're hiring locally. Good pay, good benefits. I even flagged a few roles you'd qualify for." Her face went red. "You think this is funny?" "Not at all," I said lightly. "I think it's a solution. You get a job. You make your payments. And this stops being a family crisis." She shoved the papers back toward me. "I'm not taking some hand-me-down job you picked out for me." I shrugged and tucked them back in my bag. "That's your choice. But don't say nobody tried to help." And with that, I turned back to my plate and started eating again. The conversation moved on after that, or at least they tried to move it on, but the dynamic in the room had changed. I wasn't cornered anymore. I wasn't the one defending myself. They were. Over the next few weeks, things got very quiet. I received the full accounting from the lawyer and went over it line by line. Sure enough, they were behind on payments. Not by much, but enough that the bank was starting to add fees. I sent a polite, professional email to my parents. Thank you for providing this documentation. I would like updates every quarter going forward. Please confirm you are on a repayment plan and share details. It was cold, almost businesslike. And that was the point. I wanted them to feel that shift. That they could no longer expect me to just go along silently. A week later, I got an unexpected call from my mom. "Ethan," she said softly. "Your father and I have been talking. We realized we should have told you what we were doing before we did it." I didn't rush to fill the silence. "We're making the payments," she continued quickly. "We don't want you to worry." "I'm not worried," I said gently. "I'm informed." That's the difference. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you still coming to dinner this week?" "Yes," I said. "But you should know. I won't be discussing finances at the table anymore. If there's anything to address, it can go through the lawyer." I could almost hear the relief and frustration mix in her exhale. "All right." That Sunday, when I walked in, something was different. Brenda barely made eye contact. Dad nodded stiffly, but didn't say anything about money. Dinner was almost peaceful. And then, just as we were finishing dessert, Nana Clara leaned over to me and whispered, "I think they're starting to get it." I smiled, because I knew she was right. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about changing the entire way they dealt with me. And it was working. For the first time in years, I left that house without feeling drained. I felt in control. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. One last move that would make sure none of them ever tried to pull something like this again. And I was saving it for the perfect moment. 2 weeks later, the perfect moment I'd been waiting for arrived. It didn't come in some grand family showdown. It came as a polite, impersonal letter from the bank. The cabin property's line of credit had officially slipped into default. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that letter for a long time. This was it. The leverage point. The moment when my family's choices had finally run out of road. I could almost hear my dad, Robert's voice, in my head, saying, "We did what was necessary." I took a deep breath, pulled out my laptop, and drafted an email to the lawyer. Short. To the point. As co-trustee, I am requesting an emergency meeting to discuss protections for my share of the property. Please advise on steps necessary to prevent forced sale or further encumbrance of the asset without my consent. He responded within the hour, setting a meeting for the following week. I didn't tell my parents in advance. Instead, I showed up at the next Sunday dinner like everything was normal. Brenda looked unusually quiet, her phone face down on the table for once. Mom, Diane, looked pale, tired. Dad tried to act like everything was business as usual, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. Halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat. "Ethan, I assume you saw the notice from the bank." "I did," I said evenly. "We're working on it," he said quickly. "We just need a little more time to get the payments back on schedule." I nodded slowly. "That's good to hear. But I think it's time we make some changes." Brenda frowned. "What kind of changes?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "As of next week, I'm petitioning the court to separate my share of the cabin property from the trust. It will no longer be tied to the line of credit you took out. Your debt, and any consequences of it, will be yours alone." Mom gasped softly. Dad's face went bright red. "You can't just do that," he said sharply. "Yes, I can," I said, calmly. "I've already spoken with the lawyer. It's within my rights. You used the property without consulting me. I'm making sure that can't happen again." Brenda slammed her fork down. "So, you're just going to leave us to deal with this by ourselves?" I looked at her for a long moment, then said, very softly, yes. The silence that followed was deafening. You're really willing to burn this bridge? Dad asked finally, his voice barely a whisper. I shook my head. No. I'm willing to stop letting you set it on fire and then expect me to put it out. Mom's eyes were shiny with unshed tears, but she didn't argue. I could tell she wanted to, but something in my tone, or maybe in the way I wasn't shouting, stopped her. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. The job postings from the company's local branch. The repayment schedules. The notices from the bank. All neatly organized. I set the folder on the table. This is everything you need to fix this, I said. Brenda, those job postings are still open. You get a job, you make your payments, you keep your car. Robert, those bank forms include a forbearance application that would buy you 3 more months. I've done the legwork. Whether you use it or not is up to you. I stood up, picked up my jacket, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar crushing weight on my chest as I walked toward the door. At the doorway, I turned back one last time. I love you, I said quietly. But I'm done sacrificing my future to save you from the consequences of your choices. If you want me in your lives, it has to be because you respect me. Not because you expect me to fix everything. And then I left. I didn't look back. The next few weeks were strangely quiet. No angry texts. No late-night calls. No guilt trips. The lawyer confirmed that my petition had been filed successfully, and my share of the cabin was now legally protected. One afternoon, I got a short message from my mom. We're making the payments. Thank you for the information. A week after that, I got a picture from Nana Clara. Brenda, standing in front of a building, in business casual clothes, smiling stiffly. First day at the new job, the caption read. I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath. This wasn't the happy family reunion moment I might have wished for years ago, but it was something better. Closure. They weren't going to treat me like the family safety net anymore. They weren't going to gamble with my future. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to learn what it felt like to stand on their own 2 feet. A month later, on my last night in town before relocating to another country, I drove out to the cabin by myself. The sun was setting over the lake. And for the first time in months, I felt at peace standing there. That place was safe now. Untouchable. Because I'd fought for it. As I locked up and turned to go, I smiled to myself. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving angry, or guilty, or weighed down by obligation. I was leaving free. And that, more than anything, felt like a victory.